they may go for a Southern Hemisphere Pope, but they may head towards Asia. I think they'll tilt slightly more in a conservative direction.
So we're going to talk now to the historian, Tony McMahon, who joins us now. Tony, good morning to you. It strikes me that passing of Pope Francis and John Paul II somewhat similar. Pope Francis spoke barely able to speak on Easter Sunday. John Paul II barely able to speak on Easter Sunday some 20-odd years ago. He was dead within 5 or 6 days. Pope Francis died within a day. Both fighters, both wanted to get their voice heard. They thought the Easter message was most important.
As you said, Francis and Pope John Paul II both ended their papacies, obviously with very compromised health, although John Paul II, that was a very long period of ill health that was very painful to see. But I think there were differences as well between them. And that point about Francis, especially being a Jesuit, which is an order within the Catholic Church that puts such a big emphasis on dialogue, the kind of intellectual approach to religion, that he was able to talk to all kinds of people and to reach out to people who might normally have been quite hostile to the Vatican and to Rome. I mean, Northern Irish Protestants, we were just hearing there. And I'm half Irish, my family from County Tyrone, so I get it completely. And I think he's going to be a hard act to follow because he had to balance between liberals and conservatives. He had to reach out to other faiths. What he did was pretty remarkable. He didn't make everybody happy along the way, but he's going to be a tough act to follow.
Now, some commentators have said that he said things that appealed to liberals, but then didn't really change much in order to appeal to Orthodox and the conservative side of the church. But other commentators are saying that the culture wars can no longer be avoided within the Catholic Church and that the next Pope will have to address them head on. Do you think that's the case? And if so, who do you think are the likely candidates for the papacy?
Well, I think that's interesting. If I was popping down to Paddy Power today, which of course I would not do, but if I was, I think that there will be a move, if you want, in a conservative direction. Because I think one thing about the Catholic Church, if you look back over the decades, it's always been quite astute at predicting political change. So, the way that Pope John Paul II was elected in the late 1970s, almost anticipated the fall of communism, a Polish pope, who was very charismatic, who opposed the Soviet Union and communism. You now have this kind of move, in a conservative direction in society generally. I think that the church, it'll stick its finger up to the wind, as it were, and I think that they may go for a slightly more conservative. I don't think they'll go full hog. So for example, there's a cardinal in Hungary who would be the conservative choice, Peter Erdo. I don't know if they'll go for him because it may be just too, they've got to do this balancing act still. But if you're talking about nuance and tilting, I think they'll tilt slightly more in a conservative direction.
And the Pope Francis, Tony, appointed many cardinals from South America, from Asia, from Africa. Yeah. Do you think that's where the next Pope will come from?
Well, that's really interesting because, obviously electing an African pope would be interesting because the African church tends to be socially much more conservative on LGBT issues. But then on migrants, from our point of view, it's going to be, I would imagine, a more liberal position. But, it could still be too controversial. I think there's a good chance they may go for a Southern Hemisphere Pope, but they may head towards Asia. They may go, for example, for one of the cardinals in the Philippines. I've even heard the Archbishop of Tokyo being put forward as a potential candidate. But there is another body of opinion which is saying that it's such a delicate moment in terms of balancing Europe, United States, the Southern Hemisphere. They may actually just go back to Italy. And they may put an Italian back or a European back in charge. It's going to be a tough one, and I think it's going to be several days. Francis was elected in one day. I think we may see a 3-4 day, maybe a week-long conclave. Lots of black smoke.
Fascinating, Tony. That's Tony McMahon, the historian. Will be fascinating. And of course, a lot of people, Miriam, will have seen the film Conclave.
And know what's going to happen.
They do, or they'll have read the book, Robert Harris' book. And there's skullduggery goes on behind the doors of the Sistine Chapel. Well, there is politics going to be going on behind the doors of the Sistine Chapel because small C Conservatives, the Liberals, small L Liberals, they'll be conspiring.
Absolutely,
and they have what they
working
call
out.
a consistory, which happens before, where the cardinals will get together and a lot of them will talk, and a lot of these arguments will be thrashed out. But just as with politicians, you don't always believe what cloth
absolutely.
say.
And the Pope, most recent Pope Francis, was not without controversy at all, and he did upset people. He made a very strange statement on China, saying that there was freedom of religion in China, allowing the Chinese government to appoint Catholic bishops in China, which was very controversial.
When you consider that a lot of people think there is the Uyghur Muslims are being subjected to genocide by the Chinese state.
So whatever they decide, it will not please everybody.
No.
Doogie, obviously this is a very sensitive issue really in Northern Ireland, given the history of the difficulties between Catholics and Protestants. Is this an opportunity for communities to come together, or is it still very divided?
Well, you're absolutely correct in that. Yesterday I spent the day in Armagh. St Patrick's Cathedral is the head of the Catholic Church in Ireland. Of course, Ireland, all of its religious bodies are on all-Ireland basis. And this Pope in particular really did unite the Lutheranists, Calvinists alongside the Catholicism. And that was because this Pope, one of the first things he said was, "I am a sinner." He didn't sit in white robes up high and hold himself as some sort of God. He recognised that every man is with sin, and therefore he was much more evangelical in his preaching. And the Catholic Church over his tenure very much started reaching out into the communities that were there, people that would formerly have not went to worship because they may felt ashamed of their background or whatever. And the Catholic Church really started to get back to its roots of where it was, putting morals and Christianity back into society. And quite a few of the Catholics that I spoke to yesterday were very much echoing that. And so he is being mourned by the Catholic religion here, but also by the churches in the Protestant, Lutheran and Calvinist faiths. And that has been really quite interesting for me, who was brought up in a place where religion was so divisive, to have seen during that time them coming together. I mean, I was in Dublin in 2018 when he visited there, and I seen quite a few Protestant people going to see this historical papal visit. So it has been quite a good time for Catholics in Ireland, and I think now that they maybe fear that if there's a new Pope comes in place, will he have those same evangelical values that Pope Francis had?
Interesting. That's Doogie BT. Thank you very much for that, gentlemen.